Inequality is stubbornly high. That's been an issue that has been studied and researched lately. And what we do is we look at the labor market inequality, so earnings inequality. We're not looking at overall inequality. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the dynamics and characterize the income distribution, the earnings distribution from the year 90 to 2017. And what we're going to do, the novelty of the paper, is decompose the change in this income distribution into a compositional effect, for example, how many more people have certain educational level, and a price effect or a returns effect. The Oaxaca blinder decomposition is well known, and that works for the mean of the distribution, mean income. What we do is we use the recentered influence function approach to decompose other functionals of the distribution. The quantiles, you can decompose the quantiles, you can decompose the Gini coefficient, cloud index, and any other statistics. So it's basically an extension of the Oaxaca blinder approach to functionals of the distribution, not just the mean. And the Oaxaca blinder decomposition is a special case of a RIF decomposition when you look at the parameter you're looking at is the mean. And we follow closely the study done by Ferreira, Filpo, and Messina for the case of Brazil, where they also used this approach. Now, curiously enough, the issue of the distribution of wages has not been as researched as one would expect. There's some studies by Andrea Gallego, also a chapter in the UNDP book. And I guess what's closest to our approach is Abelli. And fittingly enough for this conference, his paper is published in Estudios de Economía. So I think it's nice that this is the closest paper. And he also has a book, later book, 2016, where he expands this and looks at wages in the whole country. So that's the closest to our approach. And what we're going to do is we're going to explore a wider set of possible contributions. So this, we're going to look at not only education or experience, also minimum wage policies, formal employment, geographical convergence, economic sector, etc. And plus the decomposition, the RIF decomposition inequality. We used 13 waves of the Cassens survey from 1990 to 2017. I don't need to talk too much about this here. And we take workers from 18 to 65 years of age who reported strictly positive labor income during the period. So we're not controlling for participation, possible biases in that respect. There's some papers that do that recently for the United States. Weekly hours, we construct an hourly labor earnings measure. Two things I want to point out here. Labor earnings are self-reported, and it's not clear whether people report their gross earnings or their net earnings, net social security contribution. I talked to someone who said that it wasn't clear what people are answering. And we're going to use the gross minimum wage in what follows, and I'll explain why we do that in a few minutes. If we have descriptive statistics, the labor force has grown older, female participation has grown from 32.6% to 43.9%. And what I want to point out here is that the people earning below the gross minimum wage, if you take the net, obviously this will be lower, it's fallen from 34.4 to 19.9. So it's a big drop of people who are earning below the minimum wage. And the distribution of wages, if you look at the total earnings and per hour earnings, they follow mainly probably the same path for the Gini coefficient. So it doesn't seem that there's an issue coming through by changes in the hours worked. For females, that could be an issue at the beginning of the period. But for males, they follow the same distribution. Males are the ones that dominate the overall Gini coefficient. What we see is a fall in the per hour earnings inequality from about 0.46 to 0.40 in the period. So there's there's a tightening of the per hour earning distribution during this period. This is not only in Chile, it's also been recorded in several Latin American countries, including Brazil. Now, it's interesting to just look at the distribution because this will point out perhaps what's going on. If you look at the distribution, the year 90, there seems to be by 2011 a compression on the left side of the distribution. Not so much on the right side, but on the lower part of the distribution, there seems to be a compression, and these peaks start to appear. Right? And obviously, one can think perhaps the minimum wage is doing something, creating these peaks, and something we'll discuss shortly. Also, during this period, there was a large increase in educational attainment. Without high school degrees, the labor force dropped from over half in 1990 to less than a third in the year 2017. And the people with higher education increased substantially also. So this has been something many people have looked at and sort of attribute the change in the labor distribution, including UNDP, the chapter of the UNDP on this, and Sapelli also contribute some of this to the increase in educational attainment. If we look at the age income profiles, something very interesting happens. If you look at males, which dominate the overall distribution, you can see that there doesn't seem by cohort. These are different cohorts. Cohorts born in 1955 to cohorts born in 1990. You don't see a lot of change for high levels of education. That is, they both broadly earn the same amount at the same age, different cohorts. But if you look at the low levels of education, you see that younger cohorts are earning a lot more than their peers at the same age. So you do have the wage age distribution is very different from low education workers. The medium education worker, it seems something's going on also. Now, if we strip out of this, we take out common time effects. Is we calculate this age profiles by cohort, but taking out a time effect, a common time effect, something very different comes up. And the scales are the same as these graphs. Here you see that low education workers, the cohorts basically earn the same as their older peers at the same age. But the high education workers, they earn less. Younger workers at the same age with, for example, a university degree, earn less than what their parents with educational or with the higher education earned at the same age. So we can see here a fall in the educational wage premium for high education workers, and also something for medium education workers, that is workers with a high school degree, although here it's a bit tighter at the end.
So that's after you take off the common.
Yeah, the common time effect.
Okay, exactly. So
that's the raw data. So there's something seems to be going on with common time effects. That is, economic growth, for example, although these guys would be earning less, they're in a more prosperous time. And so, they earn just about the same as their older peers at the same age. And this is something that's common time effect is something that seems to affect the way we look at income distribution, at least in the United States. There's a recent paper by Blundell looking at that in the United States, and the common time effects, that is the shock that happens to everyone in a certain year, does seem to change the way we look at the income distribution. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a simple Mincer equation just to see what's going on. And then we're going to go into decompositions using the RIF regression. And if we look at the Mincer equations, I'm not just because of time, I'm not going to go into the details of the table. But if we look at, we have fourth order polynomial for years of schooling. What we can see is that there is a fall in the educational wage premium, but not so much at the beginning of this period, but towards the end. So the difference between 2011 and 2017 marks a fall in the educational wage premium. And if we look at experience, something really interesting happens. We have a fall, but in the 1990s. So the main fall in the returns to experience happened in the 1990s. And later, something's happening, but it's more stable in that period. And so there seems to be a fall in the educational premium towards the end of the period and the experience premium towards the beginning. Not much has happened with the gender wage gap. It remains stable around 10%. And something interesting, the people earning below the minimum wage has decreased by about 12%. So, and the wage of people earning below the minimum wage has also gone up. So conditional earning below the minimum wage, your wage is higher than in the 1990s as time goes on. And here we look at the same graph we had in the distribution, but using the minimum wage now, this is the gross minimum wage. And we can see that there seems to be a tightening. The reason we use the gross and not the net is because it's closer to these peaks. And we suspect that the minimum wage may be around the middle of the distribution here. That doesn't seem to be as strong in previous years. Now, if we do a decomposition, a typical decomposition of mean income, there's the Oaxaca blinder. Mine is that obviously there's a big increase in per hour labor earnings, and 41% of that is through a compositional effect. There's changes in whatever education, experience, given the counterfactual premiums. But most of it is coming through a change in the returns to different skills or different regional differences or economic sector. And educational attainment did have an impact on average wages, but because of the fall in the educational wage premiums, the education does not seem to be driving as much as we would expect this increase. But also workers earning below the minimum wage, as well as those conditional earning below the minimum wage, earning higher income does seem to explain something. However, most of the change, and here we include regional categorical variables, age, education, forced polynomials of that, female, male, formal workers, informal workers. We also tried if they're unionized, the size of the firm they worked on in, and all these variables, none of the observable explain much except for returns to unobservable characters. So there's something going on that we're not capturing with the observable variables and the returns to the observable variables. And that happens also if we look at the decomposition of the Gini coefficient. That is, there's something that has to do with the minimum wage. There's something that has to do with formal employment. That is the increase in the minimum wage and the number of people earning less than the minimum wage. The increase in number of formal workers versus informal workers during this period did decrease the Gini coefficient. So it did play a role in decreasing wage inequality during this period. But by far the most important impact was the negative and large effect of non-observable skills premium. That is, there's something that's changing that we're not capturing through observable, at least in the distribution, also in the mean, but in the distribution. So the minimum wage, formal employment, regional convergence explain something, but 4 times more important are these returns to observable skills. And this is something also that Ferreira found and co-authors found for Brazil. More than half of the fall in the distribution of earnings in Brazil was due to unobservable skills, or basically unobservables in general. If we look at other inequality measures, and I'm not showing you the tables because the tables are extremely long, so I'm just summarizing the results. If you look at the other coefficient, distributional coefficients, it changes the explanation is very similar. An interesting thing happens at the P95 to P5 ratio. The minimum wage does have an important impact in these ratios. So the minimum wage just seems to have compressed the distribution of these ratios. Also, formality seems to also have an effect on the 20th quintile, not so much in the 10th. So this makes sense, right? The very less paid workers are probably informal, right? And so you're getting the workers who are not so low paid into formality. And that's probably why it affects the 20th quintile, not the 10th. You end up with a potential puzzle. There's something that's missing here. The minimum wage seems to be driving some things, formalization also. But education would be, in our results, would be inequality enhancing. That is, the change in education would actually have increased the Gini coefficient instead of lowering it. One explanation for this is what Ferreira and others call the paradox of progress. That is, if you have higher educational attainment, but if the returns to education is convex, so you move more people into the convex part of the returns to education curve, then inequality can actually increase, which is also something that they find for Brazil. So education does not seem to be driving this fall in the Gini coefficient and other inequality indices. So there's something that's missing. It may be policy changes, it may be technological change, it may be quality of education. For example, basic education may have increased at the quality, and we're not measuring that. So someone who doesn't have a high school degree, perhaps he's more educated anyway than someone who doesn't have a high school degree from 40 years ago, right? Growth, we don't know. This we can't attribute to any of the observables the main reason for the fall in the income distribution in this period of labor earnings. Now, given what I showed you about the age profiles, the wage age profiles, and the effect of common time effects, one possible answer is that there are common time effects that are affecting the income distribution. What we did is we ran the Minster equation by educational group, took out the common time effect in each observation's wage, and then calculated the Gini coefficient again with these wages net of the time effect for the education group. And what we find is that the Ginis, they move almost parallel. So this doesn't seem to be driving neither the fall in hourly labor earnings. So there doesn't seem to be something coming through that. So to conclude, and I don't know if I'm ahead of time, I should perhaps slow down. Fine. Am I fine?
Yeah, very good.
What we find is that there is a decrease in labor income inequality in Chile from 1990 to 2017. This has been found also in other Latin American experiences. And this period is also characterized by an increase in educational attainments and average earnings. However, at least from our methodology, we do not find evidence to attribute the fall in inequality to the increase in educational attainment. There does seem to be something coming through from the minimum wage, something through formalization. Also, the drop in experience premiums also has something to do with this. But most of the fall in earnings inequality is explained by unobservable skills effect. And the common educational group time effect doesn't seem to be driving that either. Although more research has to be done, this is very preliminary. We only did it by educational group, we can do something more sophisticated. Perhaps there are things that are going through because things that are happening because we're not interacting education with experience. But it's still an open question that why this fall in earnings and what caused this fall, the main driver behind the fall. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good in time we had.
just in
4 minutes ahead.
ahead.
So,
Very good.
yeah.
So, and
Thank
then what is the Gini in Chile? One question. Give me one number. What's the Gini in Chile?
What's my Gini?
The Gini coefficient in Chile. I asked you that
For
question.
labor earnings? 0.4
0.4.
for labor.
Sensible for 7.
And Piketty 0.6. Bueno, that's a problem. Ah, porque son los muchos.
Si no tienes un número, pero tenés que arreglar todas las
Su reporte.
Hay otras fuerzas.
Es un hecho problema.
Son que en Chile es mucho más.
Aquí claramente no hay high skills. No.
Países que
Que tienen educación secundaria, que es como de hecho lo que tienen
¿Tienen otro PDF? Ahí están los PDF abiertos. Y ahí te aseguro son gente que usa antes y te aseguro mandan por científicos, o sea, en Mac. Sometimes I get a little confused with the
Unobservable. So I have Claudio Sapelli who will comment. Paper, you have 15 minutes, so please go ahead. Thank you for being here.
I would like to start by thanking for the invitation. This is a topic I have been working in for a very long time. And I'm actually happy to be invited to come back to these topics. My first reaction to this is this should be a very fruitful framework to look at many puzzles we have in what has happened to social indicators in the last decades. So it's the beginning. I have some proposals as to what could be done in the future, what Andres and his co-authors could do, because the paper in some sense ends with, this is a puzzle, we don't have a good answer, and to say that, okay, inequality decreased, but it decreased because of unobservables is a bit unsatisfying. No? So we would like to know more. So what the paper says, Andres says it, so I won't spend too much time with this. Inequality decreased, doesn't matter how you measure it. And the key question is why? And this is an important question, and I'll go back to this, I'll come back to this later. But what the paper says is something is happening to the returns to unobservable skills in persons that have lower levels of education. And this is new. It's not in the literature, so it's interesting in itself. So that's one thing. We have a new hypothesis on the table. Sounds promising on the one. I have a small point as to the theoretical framework, but it's really a small point. What I usually do when I try to explain inequalities, you need a theory, of course. Most of us use the Mincer equation, which is not actually a theory, but anyway, as many people do, we still do it. And one can take the variance of the Mincer equation. And it's a variance of the log of the wages. And then on the right side, you have explanatory variables that result from taking the variance of what are the different items, education, returns to education, experience, returns to experience. And you get both the average and the dispersion of all of these variables. So I am a bit unsatisfied in a framework that only uses averages. Now, I understand results may not change, but then I think intellectually would order things better. I mean, Andres said that, of course, if we decrease the inequality of education, but then people just go off on the right-hand side, they just have large returns to human capital. Yeah, of course, then it diminishing the dispersion of education will not be reflected in diminishing dispersion of income. But then we have a story. I mean, we have to systematize this story. I think what works, what doesn't work, why doesn't it? Okay. So I have basically two ideas that I thought of reading the paper as to what hypotheses we could try to test as to what's going on. The first has to do mostly with work I have done for Uruguay. Many of you know Uruguayan, so Uruguayan data a lot. And this has to do with changes in composition as to how many people work in the public sector versus the private sector. Now, the distributions of wages in both sectors are very different. And so if you basically, if you're not controlling for that, you're basically summing both. And what happens in Uruguay is that these spikes that Andres showed appear when you mix both distributions. And the spike is basically due to how public sector wages are set. Now, this may be the case here, it may not, but I think it's an hypothesis worth checking. There are many consequences of this. In Uruguay, one of the issues is that this spike, which is at the lower end of the distribution, is also associated with low-risk jobs. Most public sector jobs are low-risk jobs. So a lot of people concentrate here, and incentives to study diminish in an important way. In Uruguay, it's a big issue. I doubt that in Chile it is, but it may come. So something that one should think about.
Con la flechita.
Vamos con la flechita.
Arrow, y de arrow.
Algo pasó con la.
Ahí, aprieta el mouse y ahora puede usar la cosita.
Muy bien, muchas gracias.
Mira.
Ok, la cosita. Usamos la cosita. Primero la cosita y después la otra cosita. Okay. Another issue that I think is also worth exploring, and is actually, when I thought about it, an issue that there is not too much work on it. Of course, I did a literature review in 2 days. I may have missed something big. So, but then I think this issue is very important, and seems to me we have no seminal paper on it yet. So what is the issue? Well, the issue is there is a consensus that the quality of education was growing. Well, we can discuss about by how much and whatever. I've always had a position that the Chilean education system at some point became the best education system in Latin America. And it wasn't there several decades ago. So Chile did something right. And among the things that happened is that the quality of education, whether you measure it with PISA scores or you measure it with SIMS scores, increased. Now, I haven't done a lot of research here, but on other issues, one question that seems important is when all this increases in the quality of education, who benefited from it? Were they the same across the distributions? And I did find a paper that has an answer that sort of supports the idea that there may be something there. I'm not trying to make that point any stronger than that. There may be something there. Okay? So the idea is that children, that come from families where children usually do not educate themselves a lot, may have been the most benefited from these from this increase in quality. And a hypothesis of that sustains that sounds reasonable. No, these schools were the ones that had most to gain. Okay, they gain more. So there's this paper that I found. It says, literally in page 17, a narrowing of the gap in test results can also be seen between different income groups, with the poorest gradually catching up with other income. So this is same years of education, better quality. And we don't have this in the framework. So this may be there may be something to this. And the changes are not small. And then, if you look at trends, the only groups that have a very important increase in quality are are children from households in the two lower quintiles. So that may be something. And so hopefully we'll have an answer soon, or relatively soon. Okay, so I said at the beginning, I'll come back to this question. Why did inequality go down? Okay, so we all agree it did. But the question why is key, because even though we discuss a lot about this issue, inequality can decrease because of good reasons and because of bad reasons. So we don't really know if this is a good thing until we know why. Okay, so better quality education for kids from poor homes. A fall in the returns of experience because of possible rigidities in the labor market, a result that the paper has, and a result I had arrived to some time ago. It's also a puzzling thing that we haven't integrated in this story about what has happened in the last decades. And of course, I don't have to mention what has been in the press. The recent CASEN, seems that income distribution fell because we all are poor. So it doesn't seem good. I mean, if all incomes converge to zero, we are all equal, but we're not going to be cheering. So this is an important issue, and I think that's the reason why I encourage Andres and others to continue working on this issue. There is other relevant evidence in the paper. So because I mean, there's a lot of stylized facts, and let me just underline one, and this will be my. Okay, there is, if I understood correctly what the author said, an issue of a relative deterioration in the incomes of higher educated individuals in younger cohorts. So the relation is relative to older cohorts, but that in the paper appears to be small. But we know, and the paper shows, returns to education decreased. So that has to happen. But then there's also the issue, and that links this to the key conclusion of the paper. There's been a deterioration relative to less educated people in the same cohort. So it is an inter-cohort issue and a within cohort issue. So, I mean, this goes to the issue of whether frustration towards how the labor market was working had something to do with the 2019 upheaval, which is something most of us have tried to explain one way or another. Anyway, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Claudio. I think the issue of looking at the public sector employment is very interesting. We have to check if that's captured in the CACEN, because in the 9 sectors, it's not included, at least in the economic sector, but
It is. It is.
okay, we're gonna try that. It's a very good suggestion. I take the point of the better quality of education. We mentioned that as a possible explanation. And the reason is that perhaps younger workers, not only because schools got better, but you have a technological change where being digitally literate is more important. And perhaps even if you're poor, you play computer games, you know computers, you have more a digital education compared to older workers. So there's a technological change that may be behind, not just improving the quality of schools, but it's just a technological change that favors younger people and perhaps favors even poor young people, right? So there's something there that has to be analyzed, the quality of education and technological change with the quality of education. Now, with respect to the fall in the experience premium, you say it's a bad thing. I understand the point, but what I understand is this has been also seen in other countries, in the United States, in Brazil. So it seems to be something that's wider than just something in Chile. And it may be related again to technological change. Right? So now if someone worked 40 years or 30 years in a company, his experience isn't as valuable because now you need someone who can use the computer and can understand Excel, to give an example, right? And so perhaps the fall in the experience premium has more to do with technological change. It's an open question, but since you see it in other countries, it seems to be something that's wider than that. And finally, the relative fall in incomes by cohort. The higher, well, I won't go back to my presentation, but the higher educated cohorts, young people earn the same as their older peers, but that's because of the time effect, right? So the educational premium has gone down, but they live in a time, right, where the macro conditions perhaps are better, and so they earn the same as their older peers at the same age. But it is true that what you say is that younger cohorts from low educated backgrounds or middle educated backgrounds are going up while these are staying the same. So there is a change in the relative of high education wage profiles to low and middle education wage age profiles. So there is something there going on, and that should be explored more. So thank you. She's the comment.
She's the boss.
The comments.
You can go ahead. You can put it all together. It's up to you. Any more question?
This is a fascinating paper, not the one necessarily we are looking at, but the one you presented. But I don't know. I thought I knew a little bit about this literature, And now I realize I don't know almost. I know really. Right? And I'm very interested in you maybe educating the room, Andres, at a very basic level. I think that in the conversation, even among economists in Chile, we need to have a common ground in answering the question that I asked you before Claudio came to do the comment. We don't know, we don't have an agreement on what is the Gini. And we have conversations that go from 0.68 Piketty. There are people probably in this room that believe that the Gini is 0.68. And you said that it was almost with a 3 beginning, 0.399. You said 0.4, right? Now, I understand that there is a difference between, you're looking at earnings. Piketty is looking at a broad definition of income, right? But I think that, and I was looking in Google, trying to find papers on Ginis on earnings only, or comparisons across countries, and I didn't find them easily. I mean, I only looked for 2 minutes. So one question that I think is very important is, what is the benchmark? The Gini on earnings in Chile has gone down to 0.4, which sounds fantastic. But I don't know what it is in Uruguay, where Claudio is originally from. Maybe it's 0.2. Now, if Piketty is right and the Gini on income is 68, and you are right, and the earning and income is 0.4, then the Gini on non-wages income has to be almost 1, right? Because you have to add them up. And that's not surprising, but I think that the conversation at the policy level here is so incomplete. And Andrea says one number, you get this number, which I didn't know about the 0.4, but again, so there's quite a specific question. What's the benchmark for Ginis on earnings? What would be the average for the median for Latin America? What would be the median for the OECD? How generalized is it looking at earnings rather than at income? The OECD doesn't give this number, at least not easy, the one that you are giving. So it seems to me that you are making a contribution that is much bigger than what you told us. But anyway, those are my questions from someone who knew a little bit about it, but realizing I don't.
Let me answer that. The benchmark, I'm not sure. I haven't seen these figures.
Is this a good number, 0.4, or a bad number?
I haven't. Perhaps someone else in the room or Claudio.
Doesn't matter, because I can make your point. When you take, people make a lot of corrections. So the corrections, what you want to learn is about the trend. And when these corrections are good, you want, but then to this correction to international comparison, you have the problem.
No, because earnings are earnings. Earnings are earnings. It's a much easier.
I want to take up your second point, that when you go to full income, right, you get an increase in the Gini. Now, usually those statistics, they're family income. Right? And they take them per capita. Here it's very easy. You have one worker, one person. So it depends how you.
That's why it's also easier to do international comparisons if with earnings.
Right, with the earnings return. But what's interesting is that perhaps, and this has happened in other countries, the increase in female participation has happened more in high educated. And so the family income, even though earning distribution may have become less unequal, the family, if you look at family earnings and family income, it may be more unequal because higher income families, you get more high income.
You see, what you just said should open a complete new discussion on public policy in this country. Women, lower income women, less educated. I mean, the whole guarderías infantiles, all of that, right?
I think that's.
Yeah.
I think
there's some, but not within the framework of the engineering. But anyway, let's.
I think someone there has more.
So we support motivations because those things that is something easy to huge thing to analyze. Now, the comments is about what we are envisioning when we measure like earnings here. Right? Because it doesn't like it was published that so I think it's 21%. And it says that there's some tax incentives. So basically you can, for example, doctors. Doctors, they receive labor income, but they create like a small business for them. So the problem with this, or I don't know if you're correct for that, but in the CASM, you are not accounting for this, or basically for these tax changes that can influence what we record as earnings. So.
Okay, so that has been a criticism that high income earners are not well picked up at the test.
Yeah.
We look at that and we look at that, the consistency over time in an appendix, and we find there's no evidence that over time that has changed. Right, which is what affects our we're interested in how it changes. So we don't think that's biasing our results. But something else could be happening. Is that you get underreporting at the low end of the distribution. Because informal workers or low-income workers do not want to say their income because they think they're going to lose some social benefits. And I've heard from social workers that really happens. An informal worker earns $1.5 million a month, but he doesn't say that because he's afraid of losing social benefits, right? So you may get a distortion on both ends of the distribution. At least at the top end, we don't find evidence that that's affecting the trend.
I just sent you a paper from Studios Economia that tackles something that would be useful for you too. One of the problems that you have shown, and that's a stylized fact that goes to that paper and beyond, is the multimodal distribution that you found, and some of the comments that made by Claudio have to do with that. So basically, the multimodal distribution is something that has to be considered, and non-linear mixtures structure is probably what is behind that, and. This idea of changing returns and how the changing returns of these are observable, because you may have two persons that have exactly the same years of schooling, but that have acquired different technologies of schooling. And then they have different returns that are not observable just from your including those things would probably go a long way to kind of solve this puzzle, at least technically.
That's interesting because it called my attention, the bimodal distribution at the end. It's clearly becoming more bimodal as time goes by. So I'll be interested in seeing that paper. So that's a good suggestion.
You go a bit further on the idea that soft skills might have a big role. What do you mean by soft skills? I don't know if you said it or you do it in the paper. Soft skills matter more now. Does it have to do with the composition of production instead of employment, moving towards service sector? Do you have any thoughts on this?
Okay, so that it's a hypothesis, right? We're not sure whether that could explain. What we find is that there are unobservable factors that are explaining this form, right? That's the most important. So we look for what could possibly explain that, but it's only a hypothesis. Now we do control for sector. So people moving sectors would not explain this. But we only control for years of schooling. So if someone, let's say, has 12 years of schooling, and you're comparing that with someone 30 years ago that had 12 years of schooling, perhaps the 12 years of schooling now is very different from the 12 years of schooling 30 years ago. Particularly if you have technological change where knowledge of digital things matters more. Right, and although you have the same level of schooling, but younger kids know how to work the phone better.
Your corporate effects would pick that up.
The returns.
You were born in a more productive economy.
What you see is more formalization, right? So that perhaps you're getting more people into formal firms, and that helps. But the returns to education will take account the whole group, right? The older workers and the new workers. But I think we have to look more at workers by age, which is something we try to do with age wage profile. Right? Younger workers are earning much more than for the same low education level than their parents, for example, at the same age. And that doesn't happen for the high income, for the high education. So there's something going on there. For some reason, low educated younger people are earning a lot more than their low educated peers at the same.
Yes, Luigi. It can be possible because this decline at the top of the income distribution could be driven by the fact that maybe in the past, there were only a few people with a higher education. You're earning a rent, and this rent has been eroded over time.
Yeah, there's definitely a decrease in the education premium.
Yeah.
But we're controlling for it.
Controlling for that you still see this decline.
It doesn't explain the decline. That's all. So if you take account, that has something to do with it, but most of the decline is not related to that. In fact, if you look at the distributions, I can't put it up now. I don't have the skills. Younger cohorts to do it. But if you look at the distribution seems to be more compressed from the bottom, not from the top. It doesn't seem to be coming from the top, although there's a bimodal. It's becoming more bimodal, which is something interesting. Right? But the compression seems to be coming from the bottom.
So it's simply that at the top, you don't have the phenomenal increase you have at the bottom. That you interpret that when you take out the common time trend, you see this decline, but you're saying is that at the bottom you have this enormous increase, and at the top you simply didn't have the same, but it's not the fault of the top, it's the fault of the bottom. Contribution, yeah. The contribution at the bottom was so exceptional that.
So what happens is that what I think is happening, high educated young workers, they would earn less than their peers. But they're in a good economic environment.
No, I understand that.
So and they're earning the same as their peers. But low educated workers, young workers.
But when you say less than their peers, seems that even after controlling for education.
Yes.
So there is something that makes them less valuable. It's not just the contribution on the bottom.
No, there's increasing, declining returns.
No, but he controls for that. Even after controlling for that, there is something, there's increased supply of.
Even control after control, yes.
It's interesting. It's not obvious for fighting.
Yeah, but controlling for education, at least for educational group, high educated workers earn the same as their older high educated peers. So if I have a college degree now, I earn the same as my father if he had a college degree at the same age. But that seems to be coming from a time effect, not because there was a drop in the returns to education. So if I was in the same economic environment that he was, I would earn a lot less because there's a supply increase in.
No, but even controlling for that, because you said that education doesn't do the entire trade.
Doesn't explain the fall in the income distribution. Because in the raw data, the high educated people basically earn the same. It's coming from the low educated people.
Okay, so time's up.
Very nice.
Thank you. So we'll move on. Please. Go ahead. So we'll continue with median labor income in Chile revised. So we'll go and see labor income again.
That's true.
So we assume any problems with the paper are yours.
Both are responsibility. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I am Manuel Taboada from the Central Bank. This is joint work with Jose de Gregorio. We're going to see a lot of interesting results today that I think they will surprise everyone, except for Sebastián. And at the end, I will share a little bit of the research agenda that this paper motivated at the Central Bank. So this paper is finished, but the topics we're researching continue to evolve. What the problem we're facing is, what is the real median income in Chile? Median income is a widespread statistic. For good reason, we talk a lot about it, as it reflects some properties about the mean and about inequality. It reflects the well-being of the majority of the population. However, the data that we use to represent that median has significant inconsistencies. For example, the CACEN survey, the most popular income survey in Chile, accounts just for half of national income. That's a gap, a larger gap than for most countries. A lot of that gap comes from differences in definition. However, when we take out indirect taxes and depreciation so that the income definitions are comparable, we still get an enormous gap from the average income per worker, that's 1.3 million monthly pesos, to the median income from CACEN, that's 400,000 pesos. The inequality, you would need to have those two figures, that 1.3 million mean and the 400,000 median. You would need a Gini of 0.7 under standard distribution.
That's Piketty's number.
0.7 for Chile?
0.68, yeah.
For Chile?
Yes.
I think that's, you're sure?
Yes.
So you think that
0.68 for Chile, same as Brazil.
I had in mind that 0.7 was like for slave societies. It's higher.
I'm not going to comment, I'm not gonna comment on that part.
Ideology.
But I'm telling you, Piketty's number is 0.6.
I will look at it. Well, we get a slightly smaller number for inequality, but we use the best information available from Chilean data, which is a CACEN survey for the lower incomes and the medium incomes, but we all know it's biased, especially at the top. Our tax records are not the best due to informality. However, they are good for capturing the top incomes. So taking it all together, real inequality is reasonable that is higher than portrayed in CACEN. However, the average, I mean, should also be higher than what we see in CACEN. Our methodology combines different data sources in a coherent framework to harness the best qualities of each one of them for the first time using Chilean data. Up until 2011, the CACEN survey routinely adjusts 5 components to national accounts. I think it was wages, independent income, subsidies, rentals, and capital. However, as a paper from David Bravo demonstrated that this adjustment increased inequality and dubiously reduced poverty. The adjustment was interrupted, among other reasons, because the national account equivalent, when the reference year of national accounts changed, the total aggregate for national account almost doubled for some components. So the people in charge, the CACEN, were faced with the decision of changing like 2 times adjustment for some income components. So they decided to interrupt it altogether. More recently, Noran Lustig deals with the problem of missing reach in household surveys. And she summarizes methods that correct surveys with information within them. For example, with Pareto interpolation, you can extrapolate the richest individual that would be there if the information from the survey was representative. But she also studies external reference corrections, such as the one we're using. Later on, Alvaredo, Atkinson, Piketty, Sukman, Saez developed the distributional national accounts that generate consistent and comparable inequality measurements using national accounts concepts. So the idea is to have distributional series that are as comparable as the GP. we are used to talk about GDP, and I don't know, from China is per capita is half as Chile and so on. So it's the comparability is high. However, when we consider service, we are not as comfortable because there are differences in income definitions, in methodologies, and so on. So this methodology harmonizes income concept definitions such as that inequality comparisons are better across countries. The most similar study to ours is the Rosa, Flores, and Morgan that use this methodology to measure inequality in Latin America. However, they use only publicly available data and they deal with somewhat less detail for some accounts. So we make a lot more robustness and our data, I think, is more precise. Our methodology consists of 5 steps. The starting point is the CACEN survey that has net incomes. They don't report tax, so you would need to impute it. And the final distribution is one that's comparable to national accounts and that is corrected for all the possible biases. So the first step is starting with tabulated tax data. We generate a synthetic distribution of net income using generalized Pareto interpolation. I don't know if I can show you. Yes. So if we use a standard Pareto interpolation, we would have this line flat. So we lose detail. It is decreasing because of the progressive tax structure. However, it starts to increase at the 99th percentile due to pricing inequality. The second step is to build the same income definition from CACEN. So we need to add up labor income, pensions, capital income. And as the capital income is strongly underestimated in CACEN, for most years is under 25% of the total national account capital income. So we design a strategy to impute capital incomes very similar to the strategy that ECLAC or CEPAL used back then. But ours is continuous at the 80th percentile. That is when we start the correction. The next step is using these 2 data sets, the one from the tax revenues service and CACEN. We correct the representativeness of the survey at the top of the distribution, as we know that rich people answer less the CACEN. For example, they have like gates and dogs, so the people don't get service as much. Our assumption is not that this step corrects all the bias. We're only assuming that it corrects the bias that is more than proportional to the rest of the population. So it's hard to disentangle which of the bias predominates. However, we test the assumption changing the percentile from the 90th percentile to the 99th, and the result changed, but not so much. The next step is that we need to impute tax and social security, as the national account definition deals with gross income. So we also carefully simulate tax evasion of social security and taxes. Finally, the survey aggregates, wages, mixed income, capital are scaled up to match national account totals. As I said earlier, the adjustment factor for independent income that we get around 1.5 is, I think, far more reasonable than 3.8 that was obtained using the previous methodology. If we estimate all the results omitting step 3, we can quantify the effect of the missing bridge. So these are the adjustment factors. As you see for wages, they are always over 25%, meaning 1.25. And for most years, over 40%. That means that one should multiply wages from CACEN by 1.4 to get the national account total. This is surprising, as most developed countries like in Europe have numbers that are more close to 1.1. However, other economies more similar to Chile, like Mexico, have numbers that are over 1.4. So this is not unseen. And self-employed income, somewhat higher. It's also interesting to look at the Gini coefficient at different stages of our methodology. The starting point is a Gini of 0.49 for net taxable income, which jumps to 0.53 when we impute capital using the strategy I told you about, and then to 0.56 when we correct for the missing reach. And finally, to 0.6, not 0.7, but still a lot higher than the original data when we correct for the national account total.
So 0.6 is the largest number you have.
In the robustness, we get also a 0.65. Well,
You're close to Piketty?
yeah, but that's not the number we're most comfortable.
I know, I
with.
understand.
The median is still higher than CACEN original one, even with that level of inequality. But our star figure is the median income of dependent workers, which grew by 4.5 annually from 2006 to 2017, which is 2% more than the GDP per capita. And also it's surprising that the gap between the original number and the final corrected one is over 30%.
What is dependent worker? Formal sector?
Dependent worker, yes, is with a labor contract. We also do for independent workers, but as it depends on this adjustment factor, we can go from 1.5 to 3. We don't report them separately in this. Also, it's interesting to notice that in the COVID pandemic in 2020, there also was an increase of 12% in the median labor income. However, this is mostly explained because there also was a reduction in 12% in the labor force of dependent income. So the COVID was a heterogeneous shock affecting mainly low-income workers. We can also look at inequality measures using our distributional data. And it's interesting that the decreasing trend observed in the CACEN original data still holds. However, the decline of 11% is corrected to a decline of only 3% from 2006 to 2017. And also the Gini coefficient is 17% higher when we make the corrections. The mean median indicator, which is also a way to illustrate inequality, has pretty much the same trends. And also we see a reversal in the decreasing trend in 2020 due to the pandemic. Well, there was a recent dispute about the 2022 figures, as there was a decrease in inequality, but we don't have the national accounts data of 2022 to make that correction. We also perform a sensibility analysis For gross income, as I told you, we are obliged to choose two parameters that are the P, meaning the percentile from in the distribution from when we start correcting the series with tax data, and K, that is the fraction of capital we add to the richest quantile before making all the corrections. Well, there's a lot of numbers in there, but you can see that increasing P yields a larger median, as the correction for workers is applied only to a smaller number of them. So the correction with tax data is applied to a smaller number of them. So then when we scale up to national account totals, the gap is larger, so the increase for the median is also larger. For K, the logic is very similar, but before making the correction to tax data, we add capital income to the richest people. So when we scale up the weights, we are giving more weight to people that are more intensive in capital income than in labor. So then when we make the national account correction, the median gets higher. I don't know if that's clear enough, but so some final comments. Median labor income in CACEN that's widely used is strongly underestimated. The gross median for dependent labor income increases from 450,000 pesos to 635,000 pesos, which is a 41% increase. That is very significant in terms of well-being, etc. And also, when we correct for missing reach in our central scenario, the correction still is 32%. Even in scenarios with more extreme levels of inequality, with a Gini of 0.65, the median wage is still 500,000 pesos. I remember probably the 0.7 has retained, 0.68 has retained profits.
Yes.
So this one doesn't. So I think.
No, it's a Piketty with retained profits.
Yeah. So it's important to recognize that in addition to the well-known deficiencies of service when capturing top incomes, so when you measure inequality, it's a sin to use the original CACEN survey, but it's also bad when estimating mean income and even lower income. So I think the debate on distribution has to be symmetrical. When we are talking about high income, we should make corrections, but when we are talking about low income, we should also make corrections. As I told you at the beginning, this paper inspired a lot of research at the central bank. We're working to incorporate inequality into the macro analysis for like heterogeneous agent models and etc. And we have a unique standpoint because we're in charge of making national accounts. So we need, for example, I got a lot of headaches when trying to find the equivalent aggregate for independent workers. But now we're collaborating with the statistic division to build that exact aggregate, and surprisingly, preliminary results indicate that the 20% number we chose is pretty linear. It's around 20 or 30%. So, yeah. And we also have administrative records from the Servicio de Impuestos Internos, the Comisión de los Mercados Financieros, and we are able to match all of that at the individual level. So we know exactly how much debt people have, how many wage that they earn, capital income, how many companies people own, etc. The challenge still is tax records are good, but informality in Chile is still significant. And as the tax threshold is at the 70th percentile approximately, we also need to correct that data with income service. And we are developing a more sophisticated methodology that is able to match one-to-one individuals from the tax records to individuals in the CACEN survey. And that's harder than it looks like because standard matching methods, for example, matching propensity score, only give you like the best match for each person, but that match can be repeated. For example, my best match can be the same as your best match. And if we know that, for example, the whole population is on the civil registry and the whole population is CACEN, we have more information. That is, we need a correspondence of.
You can do with replacement and without replacement near. And you then they compare them if they are different.
Yeah, but this is better because it allows you to do it like by bins and preserve the co-distribution of other variables. So it has a lot of nice properties.
How many sectors the Leontief matrix has in Chile now?
No, that's the Leontief matrix in methodology. We use it to.
How many sectors does it recognize?
We're not using sector. We are using individual firms.
You have a Leontief for individual firms?
Yes. So that's computational, very hard, but it runs like for 2 weeks and we get the results. So we're able to, and I think that's a lot more cool because we have the universe of firms, like 2 million firms, and when you leave the smallest one out, you have like 100,000 firms. No, 200,000.
Yeah, it says it, 200K.
Yeah. So we're able to allocate profits indirectly, like the firm holds a firm, and finally an individual.
We have 1 minute left.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to comment on this paper. I think it's a very interesting one. It has a lot of effort. It has a lot of computation, lots of time devoted to it. And I wanted to make some comments related to the relevance of this paper. Not mostly on the methodology, because it's very hard to understand and to discuss, but on the importance of it. So we have maybe two main perspectives, the macro perspective and the micro perspective. From the macro one very important is, how do you set the minimum wage? You can say, well, the minimum wage could be set related to the median income. If you set it too high, maybe you can create more unemployment, even though David Card has said that maybe it's not that clear. You can think about taxes. I know about some discussions we have had with some colleagues that, of course, you want to know what's the median income so that you can charge taxes. And in Chile, we have a very low fraction of households that actually pay income taxes or wage taxes. And if you have a higher median income, maybe you can say, oh, look, I could charge more taxes to more people and I can increase the national accounts, the income part, right? So that sounds very attractive. And of course, this is very important for public expenditure burden because there is a social demand for benefits. If the median income is too low, you have so many people asking, demanding, for more benefits. From the micro perspective, there is an obvious idea about talking about poverty, about inequality. We have discussed a lot here. And of course, social policies, pensions, health, and so on. So having an idea of what is the level of the median income is very important. Right? And that's the very relevance of this paper. And I think that they also could make a better job in enhancing, remarking the contribution of that beyond the methodology, which is, of course, very important as well. Well, the next question is why measuring the median income is so difficult. It's not an easy task. And we have seen many people working for years in trying to get this statistic very accurately. The first one is that you need to balance administrative data and survey data. And with administrative data, the first thing is that you don't have that the data is prepared to do statistics. Actually, you have to work a lot with administrative data. You have to make assumptions, you have to make corrections, and it's not prepared to do statistics. So it's a challenge in itself using administrative data. Anyone in this room who has worked with that will understand very clearly. The other part, which is very important, is that we cannot observe informal workers' income. So the question is, well, we don't observe them. Where are they? Are they in the bottom of the distribution, or they are in the middle of the distribution, or somewhere else? Of course, they are not in the higher part of the distribution, the informal, well, maybe some of them, but not most of them. And the other problem is, as Manuel has just pointed out, administrative data is not publicly available. So we cannot use it for recreate the data that other people who can access the data can actually use it. So that's a problem for the research community. And on the other hand, we have the survey data lacks of the representation of the very rich. And that's a problem. We have discussed it. I don't want to talk about more about that. And it suffers from underreporting due to self-response. The question is, who is underreporting more, the richer or the poorer? Andres said that the poorer has an incentive to do that. Well, it depends when. If you ask them in a survey, you ask them when you are asking for the social security system with the Registro Social de Hogares, and then you have lots of incentive to underreport. But in a survey, that's not that clear, right? And then in the upper part of the distribution, or in the middle part, you can say we can underdeclare because maybe somebody will come to my home to rob me, or I don't want to know that, I don't want to let the other people know how much I'm earning. Having said that, the problem is, well, how important is the informal sector? Chile, where in the world is 61%. In the OECD is 17%, but there's a lot of variance between the countries. And in Chile is 27%. And look at this, 8 points of that are informal individuals, informal workers, wage workers, in formal firms. This is according to INE, right? So it's people who are working in formal firms and are not receiving, a formal income. So they are not registered there. We have 8 points there. So, and that's very important because you can say, okay, if these people are actually there, where are they in terms of the distribution? Are they in the lower part, in the middle part? Where are they? And then we have the informal firms, mostly self-employed individuals. So 14 points of that. Half of the informal sector in Chile is self-employed individuals. And most of self-employed are not higher educated. They are low or middle educated people doing informal activities. And then we have 1.8 of household services. So we have a problem of the informal sector, which is not well defined. I mean, it's not accounted in the national account. So we're missing that information. Right? But somewhere, I mean, this income is coming from somewhere. And some people is generating that. Maybe they are not reporting it and so on. So in terms of the international comparison, we have that Chile has 27% and the US has 19%. So these 8 points maybe are making this difference, right? This 8 point here. But what's the importance of this? Well, coming back to what is the median level of the labor income. So I want to be a bit provocative here. So we have been said that we cannot raise the minimum wage because it could be too high compared to the median income. Well, in fact, if you look at the CACEN figures for 2017, it was 72%, very high. According to OECD figures, the largest one, Chile is one of the largest one, I will show you, and this is the median is about 52%. So this is the ratio, the percentage of minimum wage to median in the OECD. So Chile is here. So can we increase the minimum wage? You say no, no space for that. However, if you use the figures that Manuel and Jose has proposed here, the minimum wage to median wage is actually 45%. So we are here, like Japan, Belgium, and the like. Is there a space to increase the minimum wage? Maybe yes. So this is the relevance of having a good figure about good estimation of what is the median income, right? And then from here, we can start discussing many other things. So if we believe in this, if this is a good argument to prevent increasing the minimum wage, so now we are in a problem because they have opened the window and the cat is out of the box. And so if we want to, if we believe in this result, we have to think about many other things. Well, maybe we have the possibility that the minimum wage is too low to compete to profitable informal activities. Yes, it could be. So the informal activities are the part that are missing here, and they are not in the lower part of the distribution, right? So they are not in the lower part of the distribution. So basically, this part, all these people here, all the informal part, they are not the poorest people. They are in the middle part of the distribution. So maybe we can increase the minimum wage because of the result. Yes, and then we can think about maybe these low productivity, low wage jobs are so unattractive that they're even undesirable, socially undesirable. Because this is a very inefficient firm, paying low minimum wage, making people jump to informal jobs. Then we are not accounting for them in the national accounts, and then we have a problem. And then we can think about all the policies that make incentives to work formally, the youth employment subsidy, the women's work bonus. All these policies should be reevaluated if we take this result seriously. So the importance of this result is amazing. I would say that coming from 72% to 45% is very important. So we need to be very clear about if we're going to trust this number or not, and if we have to do more work on that, right? And what is the side and the direction in which we have to go? And I think what Manuel has said is very important. He said, we need to get more information of this. We need to work and try to match better, in a better way, the surveys and the national accounts. Of course, these figures here are mostly based on the same methodology, which is compare what is in the surveys with the minimum wage, which is set in nominal terms, right? If we do the same exercise, could be a bit less. But what we know is that most of these countries have a much lower informal sector. So the adjustment will produce a smaller correction compared to what we could have here, right? So I think that the paper is very, very interesting. The methodology is very complete. Of course, you can discuss hours about it in many terms. And one of the things that I think is very important to follow is to track well, to have a clear idea of where the informal sector ends up. So if you think it's out first, okay, where ends up in the distribution when you build it later on, right? And here, this challenge for our research society, how we increase the replicability of the research. And I think I urge the central bankers to open the box for all the researchers so that we can work all with the same data and we can challenge all the ideas and we can validate all the results of the colleagues. Thank you very much.
¿Cuál es el tuyo? No sé.
I don't know if I should answer now this question
Yeah.
You
or
have about
first
10
from the
minutes.
audience.
Take questions and then we answer. ¿Tú preguntas? Somebody would.
My co-author.
I want to add noise to Sebastian's worry. If you look at, it is a great, I've seen this before, so congratulations, it's very important and it's very useful. And we need to do both of them. I wanted to ask to Sebastian, if you take tax record, okay? No CACEN and no formal workers, Gini is 0.6. You don't include the retainers, it's 0.75.
What the Gini tax Gini is.
But only considering tax.
The only tax
You don't
return.
get the 70% bonus, so
Yeah.
that's
right, yeah.
It's 0.6 without even, if I think, 0.75, I don't know.
Closer
So
to slavery.
0.68 would not be that.
It's tricky. At that point, it's tricky because
She's saying it's more than 6 years.
we tend to
No, I
say that
understand
Chile is a
that.
country where taxes redistribute very little because of VAT. But what you are saying is that the solution.
No, it's a retained earnings.
You say the incomes, you tell the IRS you have. You see that data? I'm not saying it's higher than 0.68, I'm saying that.
0.75 is lower, it's
Yeah.
higher than 0.68.
Yeah, but you have, but it's only formal workers. You have to add informal people. So.
But I think that the point that Ms. Tanya made is a very important one. Who are the informal people? All the dentists are informal.
Yeah, the
Right.
narcos.
But the dentists, I mean, we also go to the dentists. And most of them don't work for us. They own their own business.
Oh, yeah, but they show up at business. And then you put that in within.
Then you have to adjust, you have to take that and put it back to labor, which very.
No, but this is not only, this is, you're right.
Yeah, very true, very-
My number, it includes capital.
No, it is-
We're adding noise, we're adding.
First, well, think about what quality of question like that, for the piece, so can you like the signal paper, or this one of things, you know? So I have two questions. First, how is the result compared to Moran at first, other way of life? Don't we have anything like this? How do you compare them? And second one, how does you as a result to your parental choices? So you want to realize parental view. How do you, for example, a single guy or another type of institution?
Yes.
So I think you have the unique opportunity to tell us the difference between, informal, the people we know about, and the non-formal. The non-formal, you get an invoice, like in my own company, and we don't know much about them. We don't know that, you pay taxes, but you do not pay for social, you put it that way, right? So you have that information, and you have people who have contract. You have people who have both sources of income. I have an account, I have my contract, but I also do some consulting, dentist or do whatever. How much, the median income of those people are, how different they are, just put it all together and, buy them so you can separate them, but sources of income.
So.
So the newspaper showed that there's a decrease in inequality over time with CACEN. There's some circumstances say that there's a change in the underreporting of the wage over time. So can you address that in your methodology? Can you see?
Sorry,
Can you see if there is if there's a change in the underreporting of rich people in CACEN over time, and if that will affect or not inequality, increasing inequality that we observe in CACEN?
Yeah, okay, so.
Just something that I said, I would be very careful with this discussion about increasing minimum wage because Chile would be a bit more like Japan in that chart. So maybe that Chile would try to do what it's trying to do continuously to emulate Bolivia now, which has the world record in terms of
Informal, 60%,
not 85%.
85.
Yes, sorry. When we do it big.
So going backwards, I think I can speak very little about a formal model of choice between informality and formality and tax evasion. This paper is only about measurement, which is very important for other people to put it in their model. But yes, of course, that concern about raising a minimum wage and increasing informality is very valid. But it would be less valid if our data is correct. So it's an important thing to determine. And your question regarding the underreporting of the rich, we can only see if the gap between what the rich report at CASEM and what they report at the tax records, that effectively is increasing over time. So you can see that the missing rich correction is larger for more recent years. We cannot say much about if in the tax record they are increasing tax evasion. I think you can look at it indirectly through national accounts, for example, in the capital income aggregate, and you compare that to what they declare as formal capital income. And I also think that that gap is increasing significantly, but that's not on our paper. That's like for future research. So
We can discuss later.
Okay, so Pablo's question.
Yeah, about the paper, what's the paper? The Pareto, if you don't assume the Pareto.
No, it's a question.
Look, and then because when Chile was able.
No, I remember your question. See.
Because this kind of discussion about what is the distribution of effect, the distribution of other things. Or I different type of distribution to include this kind of things. Or not on the solar levels.
No, we just tried this generalized Pareto interpolation that I think it's very flexible because it's data driven and it matches like very well the points of the actual tabulated data. And in Chile, we have a lot of detail at the top. So we don't need to assume like a flat coefficient and it goes like very smoothly. We cannot say much about the bottom of the distribution using that. But this methodology is like almost empirical because we have a lot of points at the top. So, and your other question regarding the result of Flores, etc., they are somewhat higher in the Gini, but they also include retained earnings. When you don't consider retained earnings as we don't, they're very similar, like 2 points in difference. They don't talk anything about median income. I think they should have an Excel file somewhere when I can look at it, but it's not in the paper at least.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
In the case of contribute everything to that.
That's so that our by.
That's why, the other one is that. So they are.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I will be the last presenter on this session of income and inequality. First of all, just let me thank you for the privilege of being able to present here. And today I will talk about our paper, Teacher Quality and Learning Inequality, which is going to work with Catalina Morales and Sergio Ursua, both from the University of Maryland. So this is the first time we're presenting this paper, so we are very looking forward to all of your comments and questions at the end of the slot. So let me start by showing you a figure that some of you might be familiar with. So this figure is showing the distribution of the student level math PSU scores between the years 2013 and 2021, or depending on school of origin, okay? So the blue line here, the blue line show the scores of students coming from public schools, while the red dashed line shows the results from students coming from voucher schools. So as you can see here, there is a quite prevalent difference between how students from voucher schools score in terms of relative to voucher school students, which is not just on a means difference, but we can see that there's a quite stark difference across the whole distribution. So this is the main fact that motivates us to study this question. And so what do we know about this? First, education is universally acknowledged as a crucial determinant of personal development and societal advancement. But the impact of education is not homogeneous, with some groups benefiting from education more than others. At the same time, we know that teachers are a critical input on skill development, skill formation. But what we really don't know much about is what is the impact of teachers in explaining this performance gap in PSU scores. So, of course, we're not the first people in trying to understand the impact of teachers in performance. The usual approach of later years, right, has been to use value-added models to measure teachers' impact on student outcomes. So as a very general summary of what value-added models do, right? They are trying to take out, trying to use big data sets, right? With a panel where they observe the teachers many years, trying to back up what teachers are more effective in producing high scores. So the problem with that approach, though it's pretty prevalent in the literature, is that since this is virtually adding teacher fixed effects to a model, it does not provide much information on which teacher characteristics are the ones that are contributing more to improving students' outcomes. Of course, due to data limitations, it is hard to measure teacher-student test score transmission until now. So one of the novelties of this paper is that we were able to successfully link the results of over 500,000 students graduating from high school, who were taught by over 9,000 teachers across 2,300 schools during the 9 years, right? And this was a huge effort, and we think it's pretty novel because it allows us to readdress some old questions. So what does this paper do? We're trying to answer the question of what is the role of teachers in the PSU gap between voucher and public schools. So as I was telling you, we are able to match a rich set of teacher and student characteristics to predict student PSU performance. And what's novel about this is that we're able to identify PSU scores of now teachers. So we not only have the PSU of the students, but we have, for some of the teachers, we have how they perform in the PSU themselves. So to try to answer this question, we do it in a stepwise manner. So in a first step, what we do is to estimate the relevance of teacher factors in the PSU production function. And then we implement a Oaxaca blinder decomposition approach to explore differences in performance between public and voucher schools, not only at the mean value, but at different statistics through the distributions. So this figure shows a bin scatter plot of teachers and students PSU for public and voucher schools. So you can see here that on the x-axis, we have average teachers PSU score, which is standardized. And on the y-axis, we have student PSU score. So what this figure is showing, right? Two facts that I think are novel, right? So first of all, we have that conditional on a level of average teachers PSU score. We can see that voucher school students are systematically outperforming public school students. And we also see that there is this positive slope. This is just very raw data, right? There is this positive slope suggesting that having a higher average teacher's PSU score, it's connected to students scoring on the higher end. Okay, so of course, this is very raw, and there might be a lot of other things going on. So we will systematically include them in these models, trying to pin down what's the role of teachers.
Este es el mismo año, es hace 1 year or many years?
This is average across 9 years.
And that's just a correlation that you.
This is just the correlation, yes, just raw data.
No control variable.
No control variables, not anything, yes. Okay. So from our research, I think there are 3 empirical findings worth taking away. So the first one is that, but for the sake of this presentation, I will only focus on math results, but we do this systematically for both math PSU scores and Spanish PSU scores. Okay, so first we find that the math PSU gap is not explained by solely controlling for socioeconomic status of a student. So if you control for in this case, we're using maternal education. If you control for maternal education, you're only able to close the 28 points gap. So this is the gap, right? This will be the gap we're seeing. This gap can only be closed in about 6% points by including socioeconomic status of like the student's background. When in previous literature, particularly looking at SIMS scores, which is much lower stake than PSU scores, we can see that just controlling for socioeconomic status virtually closes the gap. That's not the case for sure. And then we know that also past performance and the school-specific PSU take-up rate are critical for being able to close the gap. So you also need that information. Second, we know that average teacher PSU performance is a strong predictor of a student's performance on the very same test. And this is something that's novel because for the best of our knowledge, we're the first one to be able to connect PSU scores of both teachers and students. And what we find so far is that an increase in 1 standard deviation on average teachers' PSU score, it's associated with an increase of 2 to 6 points in students' PSU. So of course, if we think about PSU scores, right, we're thinking about 700 points, 750 points as good scores to access higher education. If we think this might still be relevant as the year-to-year variation in cutoffs, it's around 10 points. So 2 to 6 points might make the difference in whether or not you're able to access or enter a mathematics.
Clarifying question. So this is these are K through.
I will tell you in the next slide. Yeah. Just to hook you in.
I'm already hooked.
confused. Well, you said teachers' performance. If you.
When they were students,
Huh?
Average.
when they were students.
When they
Yeah. When they were student, performance. But that's not explain the difference. Explains the low performance about teacher. That's explain the difference.
But it's not.
Explain the difference, you need a composition. Say, for example, in voucher school, teachers are better.
Yeah, so that's the point that we're trying to establish. So we are looking at that in two steps. So first, do teachers make a difference in individual PSU scores performance? And then the second point, we're applying a Oaxaca decomposition to tackle the gap side of the question. Yes. Okay. Of course, there's no solid claim so far. This is just the association we're finding controlling the best we can. And third, teachers play a role in explaining this gap, not through composition effects, but through the data, right? Which we will interpret as productivity differentials across the schools. And these differences can explain about from 10 to over explaining the gap in 60 points. Okay, for a more structural approach, we're writing a opinion paper that it's trying to tackle the causality of this issue much more granularly. Okay. So the data that we use. This was a huge data effort. So we have information from mainly 4 sources, right? So we have PSU data for teachers taking the PSU from year 2006 to 2021. And we are looking at cohorts of graduating students that are exiting schools in 2013 to 2021. We are keeping only the first PSU record that they have for the sake of this presentation, math. And from the teacher's PSU application, we have an array of very rich information. And what we are keeping so far is whether they selected education as a top 3 choice when they ranked where they want to go after school. Then we turn to SIMSA data, and we control, right? We try to match at the student level how they perform in their 8th grade SIMSA to control for differences in ability, basically, of the students. And we're able to also retrieve from these SIMSA data questionnaires, gender and maternal education, which is in 4 categories: most high school, technical degree, university degree, and postgraduate degree. And lastly, we need a way to match students to their teachers. And what we do is to use these 2 data sets. So we have the teacher by grade and subject. These 2 first data sets are restricted access data sets, but these other 2 data sets are publicly available in the Inedu website. And on the teacher by grade and subject data set, we can retrieve information on the subject that each teacher is teaching at the classroom level. So we're able to match them and only keep teachers, for the sake of this presentation, that are math teachers teaching high school classes. Okay, so we already know how well this student did on 8th grade, and then we're looking at what were the characteristics of their teachers after 8th grade. Okay.
Sorry. What do you do with the teachers that teaching one than more schools?
1 or more schools? We are, okay, yeah, so that's a great question. Let me just.
1 second, but you're not controlling for the amount of time that each teacher has been teaching the subject.
To the cohort?
Experience, yeah.
I will. So, okay, so let me try to answer both questions. So from this data set, we're able to retrieve whether they are, to identify if they are math teachers. And then from this other data set, we have a lot of information on their age, their teaching experience, tenure, education degree, and whether if they hold an education degree, and whether they attended a selected institution following the literature, that's tagging selected institutions for Católica and Universidad de Chile. And what we do, given the nature of many-to-many connections, right? So a teacher has many students through their teaching life, and a student is taught by many teachers, right? So what we do, given that our unit of observation and main goal is to explain difference in distribution, we are keeping students as our unit of observation, and we're averaging out teachers, any teachers that we have available for high school for each graduating cohort. So when a teacher teaches in more than one grade, we are weighting that, well, we're doing a weight average of that. Okay, so of course, that's the best that we can do with the sample, because as you might imagine, teachers that are taking the PSU in this period are not all teachers in the system, right? So we have to narrow our sample to students that have a teacher taking the PSU in this period. We have to narrow it down to students that are taking the PSU themselves, and to students that also have information on their SIMSIM. And of course, this makes our sample much more smaller. But still, my estimate is that we're having around a third of all graduating students in our sample. Any questions? No? Okay. So how does that look like? So in panel A, okay. So on panel A, you can see student level information, and column 1 will show you the mean for public school students and column 3 for voucher school students. And you can see first on the PSU results line that students that are coming from voucher school have 28 points on average more than students that are coming from public schools. And that's also reflected on their background when they graduate from 8th grade, because they are 0.25 standard, there's a 0.25 standard deviation gap between them as well. Then we also see that it's much more likely that you take the PSU if you're a voucher student. So students coming from voucher institutions are taking the PSU, 87% of them take the PSU versus 70% from public school. And then the next 4 variables, you can see that the samples actually don't really look that different in terms of their observables. So the ratio female is pretty similar. And even though their mothers are a little less educated, the differences are not as striking as one would have expected. Then on panel B, we will have this information, again, averaged out for teachers for math teachers that are teaching high school. And we can see that, of course, or maybe not of course, but there is an evidence of teachers on public schools scoring less, 0.1 standard deviation below teachers from voucher schools. But their GPA, it's not actually.
Why do you standardize the teachers' PSU and not the students?
Why standardize teachers' PSU? I think that it's more interesting to see the impact on the gap. It's like the gap kind of, yeah, I could do it.
I mean, it's more intuitive. It would be interesting to see whether the teacher's PSU is 475, similar to the students, or if it's.
Yeah, no, this is actually around 600.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yeah.
So 0 would be 600?
615, I would say, yeah. The standard deviation, it's about 60 points.
So the mean
The mean,
for
it's
teachers is
600.
much this.
Well, those
These are-
that's for going into maybe the ones who graduate and go and stay in the profession is the one that have 600. These are people working as teachers.
Exactly.
on the public system.
Yeah, as opposed to those who apply and are accepted into the schools.
Yeah, it's a little different.
Say the other ones. Teachers in the universitarios.
Yes.
Also, well, just because they are. So the teachers of the kids that are coming from the school. They have, I'm just worried about the age of the teacher right now.
Oh, yeah.
Young.
Very young, yes, absolutely, yes.
Maybe increasing in terms of the impact of the PSU for kids in with a very steep slope.
And so if you added the teachers that are in the preuniversitarios or private classes, they are taking the PSU all the time and they're much older. Maybe you miss that as well.
Yeah, that's true. For the sake of this presentation or for this paper, we're just for like keeping the first PSU score. So we will have some variation in terms of age, but you're right that we're looking at a very selected sample in terms of teachers that are teaching and taking the PSU that we're selecting. So we are looking at teachers that are around 31, 32 years old and have 3 to 4 years experience in school.
We have 5 minutes.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, so then let me tell you what we do. First, on the first step, we are trying to explain PSU performance, and we are just modeling a simple OLS model in which we are including a voucher, this beta 1 coefficient, which will be capturing the gap, right? Because beta 1 will capture the gap, and it will be changing as we include more controls. Then we're controlling for socioeconomic characteristics, a vector including a lot of teacher characteristics, their SIMS score, and their PSU score of the school, which is lagged. And also we're including cohort 6 effects and clustering our standard errors at the school level. Nevertheless, as you might imagine, if we are moving this to a insert kind of setting, there might be self-selection because we're only observing students that do take the PSU, right? So to try to control for that, we are including the lag PSU take-up rate of the school of origin on top of including their past performance. So we're taking what was the PSU take-up rate when they were in 8th grade. Okay, so trying to avoid endogeneity somehow endogeneity issues. And what we find is this. So if we only control for cohort 6 effects, we see that the gap goes from 28 to 27 points. By also including the socioeconomic status controls, we are seeing the gap drop another point, right? Then we include teachers, and the gap, it's only going down by 0.5 points. And what we actually need to close this gap is to include both the SIMS, which cuts the gap in half, right, from 25 to 12 points. And lastly, when we include this PSU lag kind of propensity to take the PSU variable, we're able to completely close the gap. Okay. Also, you can see from the second line that teacher mass PSU, it's a strong predictor of better PSU performance for students. Okay, let me go very, very quickly because I have 2 minutes.
I'll give you one.
Okay.
Just one question. The fact that you have this voucher is significant. It means that you do not have explanation with the rest. So there is something on voucher that's not here that we need to understand.
That's correct. Okay. So then we switch to trying to understand what's explaining this gap, right? So this is pretty similar to what Andres presented before, right? So we're thinking about that classical Oaxaca blinder decomposition in which we're trying to explain the difference in expected values from students that are how they are scoring when they are from voucher schools versus how they score when they are from public schools. But Oaxaca blinder decomposition only allows us to look at differences in means. The good thing is that it allows us to divide the differences in means into 2 components. So then this is an unexplained component that it's saying if we keep all the characteristics constant and we can, what is coming from differences on productivity, if we're thinking about teachers' impact, and what is coming from differences on teachers' characteristics. And then we are able to use this new recenter inference function, Oaxaca blinder decomposition, to not look only at the mean, but to look at all the statistics that any statistic that is of interest to us, making us, and what this allows us is to create a quantifactual values for each statistic. Okay, so this is the Oaxaca decomposition, and very quickly you can see here that the explained gap the part that can be explained for difference in characteristics, it's about 25 of the 28 points. And the unexplained gap, it's about 3 points. If we focus then on the explained gap, so the part that's coming from difference in characteristics, we can see that it's mostly coming from 8th grade test course differences and these propensity PSU differences. If we then move to differences in productivity, we can see that teachers are the ones that are most important for explaining the gap. Okay, so this is just for the expected value. So the difference on the center of these two distributions that I showed you on the first slide. If we then switch to looking at differences in different parts of the distribution, we can see something like this. So what this is showing is, again, what can be explained by differences in explanatory variables and what's explained by differences in productivity. And what we can see is that if we compare percentile by percentile each of the distributions, we see that differences, the gap, it's about 20 to 30 points all the way, which is consistent with the graph I showed you before, which is virtually a shift. So it's the same distribution that's shifted to the right for voucher students. Then, if we just zoom in to see what's going on the composition, on the structure side, we see something like this, right? So here we have what's driving factor by factor the composition effects, and we can see that this increasingly, this positive and increasing effect that's favoring voucher school students, it's coming mostly from Simpsons.
These are individual Simpsons or school average Simpsons?
Individual Simpsons. And then, of course, on a much smaller scale, PSU take-up seem to be very relevant also to explain this positive gap. Then, if we switch to productivity, we can see that across the whole distribution, teachers are systematically favoring or are systematically more productive explaining the gap for voucher students. And we see this decrease on the impact of PSU take-up on explaining this gap. And this is consistent with students from public schools being, if taking the PSU, being much more higher quality in a sense, much more higher achievers than the ones that are comparable on the voucher side. So, okay.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Si fue la gana sería la cosa productiva que ha hecho en su vida.
Okay, so it's my turn to comment this paper, Teacher Quality and Learning Inequality. Well, I always do this first slide, what the paper does, so I make sure I understand what the paper does. So it explores the relevance of teachers in the performance of students in college admission tests and the role of teachers in explaining the gap in academic success by school type, specifically focusing in the gap between voucher and public schools. The paper uses a very nice data set that includes administrative data on student performance in college admission tests and teachers' performance in the very same test. And this is a novelty of the paper, and Christina already told that it's this is recent data that allows us to make this kind of analysis. The paper, my lecture of the paper is that it has three main findings. First, socioeconomic characteristics have a very small impact in closing the gap between voucher and public schools. And this is a very important finding because previous literature that explored this gap in Chile found that socioeconomic characteristics close the gap. So there's a paper by Misala and Romaguera that analyzed this question in the 2000s, I think, and they found that if they control for socioeconomic characteristics, the whole gap between voucher and private schools was closed. So this paper is finding that the socioeconomic characteristics are explaining very, very little of this gap, which is a very surprising finding given the previous literature. Second, I think that another important finding of this paper is that teacher characteristics explain very little of the gap. The differences in teacher productivity explain a larger portion of this gap. So they make this difference between observable characteristics of teachers and how these characteristics interact with type of schools, and so the coefficients are different between the two types of schools. And also an important finding, in my view, is the strong complementarities between student ability and teacher characteristics. So better teachers in terms of observable qualities are much better for better students. Okay, so those are the main three findings in my view. I think the paper leaves some unanswered questions that are very interesting. The first one relates to the first finding. Why is the finding so different from previous research? So there are differences in what the paper does. The paper is focusing on PSU scores, which is a high stake test, versus SIMSE, which is a low stake. There's also difference in student age. These are 18 years old versus previous papers that look at fourth grade SIMSE. So students are different, and there could also be difference over time. So maybe the gap in the early 2000s was completely closed by including socioeconomic characteristics, but maybe the gap is increasing over time because there's a change in school quality over time. So I think that being able to see which one of these explanations is the one that explains the difference between the findings of this paper with the previous literature will be very helpful to know what public policy to enact. Maybe the difference between these two schools are increasing with student age. So maybe the difference the gap can still be closed at fourth grade. But once we arrive at 12th grade, the difference is too big and we cannot close it. Or maybe something is happening over time. I don't know, but giving the answer to this question would be really great to see what is going on. The second thing, the question that arises or the reflection that arises after reading the paper was that there's something that is not too clear to me about the difference between schools versus teachers. Because the paper here focuses on the gap between public and voucher schools, but the main explanation is teachers. So there could be several reasons why these two things interact. Maybe voucher schools are attracting better teachers. So there's difference between teacher characteristics between these two types of schools. There could be also institutional factors. So public schools can have some rules that make it difficult for better teachers to promote student learning. Or it could be something about the students in these two types of schools that is interacting with the characteristics of teachers. And I think the third explanation is the one that is more consistent with the evidence found in the paper. But I think the paper will benefit from this discussion because they're very different, these three mechanisms. So yeah, the paper probably is supporting more the third one because they find this complementarity between better students. So teachers being more productive, but with better students. Okay. The third reflection that I had after reading this paper is that past achievement explains an important part of the gap, but past achievement can also be explained by school time. So past achievement is the SIMS 8th grade score. And the authors of this paper are looking at what happens in high school. So between 9th and 12th grade and the teachers they have in this period of time. But I was missing, well, what is the proportion of K to 12 schools in this sample? So maybe we're only attributing this gap. So, okay, so past SIMS can be hiding a much larger gap. So it closes the gap, but it could also be hiding more differences between public and voucher schools. Okay, last thing, my comments are very short, so I can give more time to the discussion. So the last thing is that there's a related paper that I think that it will benefit the analysis. This is a paper by Nilsson, Gallegos, Carnani. It hasn't been published, I understand, and they look at this at a similar question and how screening and recruiting talent at teachers' college can affect academic achievement. And the authors have data similar to the one you have in your paper. And they find a robust and positive concave relation between college entrance exam scores, this is teachers' exam scores, and several measures on teacher productivity. So this paper, this is table 1 from this paper. They look at teachers with different PCU scores and how they stay or not in the profession, if they stay teaching, if they graduate from college, etc. And here in the last table, they look at some relation with student test scores. So this is a paper that I will think will help you to complement the analysis. Okay, so those are my comments.
Gee.
Yeah, so congratulations, great paper, great comments. So if I understood correctly, SIMS is the main driver, am I? You said something?
I wouldn't say it's the main driver, but it's one key factor in trying to close this gap, yes.
And it's surprising that other institutional factors are not that important. And I think that Valentina said that previous work on Simpson said that for Simpson, the institutional factors were.
Yes.
So if we do a telescoping, if you exclude Simpson and add those institutional factors,
do I find the same result?
you will find that the institutional fact Simpson is what's another. It seems to me that is something to explore.
Yes. I don't know. Even teachers could be going and teaching Simpson.
Right.
Yeah. And then they don't do anything at all. And that's what you're finding.
Right. But it seems to me that and not for the paper necessarily, because the paper is in the big scope of things, you have to telescope Simpson into high school. And the other question that I have is that if anyone has looked at the subset of students who did all the way to 9th grade in voucher school, so, and then they switch. Because again, it seems that if I understand correctly, is that it names, oh, Andrea has done that, okay.
Bernardo Lara and Alejandro.
Okay, so that, I don't know the results, or I don't remember the results from that paper, but that seems to be, and I mean, we want to control for other things.
Yeah.
And we are fixated in using regressions to control for other things, but there are other ways of controlling for other things, like nearest neighbors, matching connotation, or these kind of experiments.
Absolutely.
So that would be interesting to look at the Andrea Lara and who was the third thing?
Alejandra.
And Alejandra Gonzalez work.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that's my reading for today. Yes, I would say that those are very valid points. I think that the only issue that we have with thinking about this PSU gap is that if we include, for example, school fixed effects or another way of controlling for differences in schools, we're not able to estimate a gap anymore.
Right.
You know, like that's why we're doing our best. And also including SIMSE, it's very student specific in terms of institutional factors might be much more broader for different types of students within a school. But yes, I think we can think about it. Yes. And yes.
So the teacher seem very young, like to my age. So I was wondering whether the fraction of teachers that you can merge is smaller or is the same public versus virtual school. So I'm thinking that maybe teachers in public school stay longer there because of their experience, and therefore like maybe you're staying less, you have less information.
That's a good point. I should. Yeah. So in one of the papers that we're working, like this allows us to answer a lot of different questions. So we are actually looking for the impact on how long they stay in the education. So I think that the paper that you pointed out, thank you, it's pretty relevant to what we're doing for different reasons. And yes, we find that there are important differences on who stays on the teaching profession, and particularly it is important thinking about the gap.
Another question I was guessing, like so I would think that maybe the means score is important as you have in a way, but maybe also like how good they are. So maybe the effect is not linear. Maybe like having a super good teacher has like a very large impact, and you're not finding it.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you. Any more questions?
Yeah, as I understand, so unfortunately, it's but as I understand, basically you're saying, and I will put it very well, is that teachers with the same quality as PSU are more productive in vouchers. Now, what I would do, like trivial econometrics, would be to look for interactions. You don't have to look at with interactions or whether the PSU interact with some factor that makes them more productive. It could be. So this is.
How do you measure productivity?
No, productivity is because of the difference in score.
Of details.
Oh, no, we are saying like this is a bunch of characteristics that might be proximate.
Might be.
Yeah, no, I'm not, yes.
Okay.
I'm not actually computing the value of
And the fact score that you're using is the fact score of the school. No,
but yes, take a break, yes, the school of origin.
Nobody that's nice to see. That's relatively persistent variable for each school. Then that would kind of be like either a fixed effect or either something that is measuring quality of the school that maybe has something to do with all the other things that you're using. That is an instrument for something else that is combining all the other factors.
Absolutely. And I have to say that, of course, as one would imagine, just including factors on the regression model starts closing the gap almost mechanically. So yes, it might be the case that it's actually capturing something else that we're labeling.
Probably related, precisely related to your question. You have a school that specializes in producing that kind of result. So
absolutely, yes.
I'm delighted by your just a question, how many transitions do you have in the data? Can you perhaps separate this, what's fixed effect from other factors, school fixed effect by transition?
Transitions.
Change, school change teacher.
Yes, we could do that. Of course, we have education data in Chile, it's insanely rich. So we actually are able to follow kids from first grade to virtually, if we have access to the data, to their labor wages, right? So yes, we could see if kids are switching teachers, are switching classrooms, are switching schools. Yes, yeah, we're not exploiting that for the sake of this paper, which is very descriptive, but we're trying to think about a more experimental setting too. So yeah.
And those data are available to any researchers?
Depending. So education, yes. Wages, not so much. Yeah, you have to be connected to the right people. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let me announce you first. We have,
Estamos hablando en inglés para Luigi que no está.
Pero tengo que forzarme.
We are doing it to benefit Luigi who is not here. Como italiano, aprovechamos el italiano.
¿Para qué cosa, Bambini?
Como Luigi no está
Está conectado, sí, lo que está conectado al exterior. Personalmente está todo desde.
Está lo mismo.
puede elegir en lo que hablar en lo que tenga,
Yo
¿no?
no sé presentar eso en castellano. Pero no, yo soy you speak Spanish.
You speak Spanish, so she said native to speak.
so
We have students, so.
Okay.
We have students. Okay, so let's go.
do it in English or?
No, we do it.